Today, we need to talk about the track record of Chaos Control in GOAT format. Now, there are many control decks in GOAT format that use Chaos Sorcerer, but when people use the term Chaos Control, they are usually referring to a control deck that uses Chaos Sorcerer, Thunder Dragon, and Metamorphosis. That's what we're talking about today. Now, if you were to ask someone what makes this sort of deck good, they would probably just cite the power of these three cards as their evidence. Metamorphosis is the quintessential control card of GOAT format, and decks with Chaos Sorcerer and Thunder Dragon have been dominating GOAT format for over 2 years. Surely a deck combining the most powerful cards in GOAT control with the most powerful cards in Chaos should be even better than both, right? Today on GOAT Duels, let's investigate. Now, all things being equal, the more popular a deck is, the more we would expect it to win, just based on probability. So for example, if 10 people enter a tournament with deck A and 5 people enter the same tournament with deck B, we would assume that deck A is twice as likely to win the tournament and get high placings as deck B, just as a pure default. Now, what if over a sustained period of time, deck B actually won more tournaments and had more top placings than deck A, in spite of it being only half as popular? We would then say that deck B is overperforming and deck A is underperforming, and hence deck B is very likely to be a better deck overall than deck A. And that's exactly what is happening right now with GOAT Control and Chaos Control. Based on the stats that we have, Chaos Control is likely about 5 times as popular as GOAT Control. Yet, in spite of that huge difference in popularity, GOAT Control actually has more tournament wins and more top placings than Chaos Control in 2022. And this is a huge statistical anomaly. In fact, Chaos Control is the most underperforming deck of 2022. It's usually one of the 3 most popular decks in any given tournament, yet it sees relatively few big placings in comparison to that popularity. Standard Chaos, Warriors, GOAT Control, Burn, and Monarchs are significantly outperforming Chaos Control in terms of their relative usage. Now, I'm not saying all of this to attack any particular people that are playing Chaos Control. I am saying this to highlight a surprising fact about the GOAT format metagame and give you a different perspective. And of course, as I've often said, there are a lot of viable decks in GOAT format. And yes, you could win a tournament with Chaos Control if you're a great player. And the GOAT format meta is also prone to changing. Chaos Control has been underperforming in 2022, but people could come up with new deck lists that do better in the future. But I feel that Chaos Control's performance issues really highlight the problems with the power plus consistency framework that a lot of people use for evaluating decks. In spite of its poor performance, I actually expect people to keep playing Chaos Control simply because having Chaos Control and Metamorphosis in the same deck just feels OP. And I've fallen into that trap before myself. Instead, however, I would like to encourage players to adopt a more matchup-focused framework for evaluating decks. This philosophy explains the success of decks like Monarchs, a deck that looks bad on paper but has seen huge outperformance relative to its popularity. So why do Monarch decks do so well in tournaments? It's simply because they have a bunch of cards that are good against the meta. Simple as that. You don't win tournaments by playing cards that are good in a vacuum. You win them with cards that are difficult for your opponent's deck to deal with. You have to understand that winning matches on paper or based on whatever theory you came up with is not the same as actually winning matches in the real world. So as someone who was once a big proponent of Chaos Control and helped popularize it, you might ask me what changed. 2 years ago, Mind Control was absolutely everywhere. People were citing 3 copies almost universally to counter Chaos, and some people were even main decking 3. My idea was simply to play Mystic Tomato and Dark Mimics to counter those Mind Controls, and it worked. It worked so well, in fact, that Mind Control is rarely seen today at the top levels of play. Chaos Control no longer needs to fill the niche of being a Chaos deck that counters Mind Control, and now I just feel that there are better decks in today's meta. But the way that players feel about Chaos Control today reminds me a lot about how players felt about Detox GOAT Control in 2018. I would ask players, hey, what does your deck actually beat? And they would tend to dodge the question by referencing how, oh, this deck has so many different options, and oh, I can outplay my opponents. Eventually, though, players did catch on to the fact that Detox Goat Control didn't really have many good matchups, and they moved on to either other lists of Goat Control or just different decks entirely. There's one difference with Chaos Control today, though. While playing a bunch of powerful cards is not enough to succeed at the highest levels of play, it is a good way to boost your win rate at lower levels of play, like the Dueling Book ladder. If both you and your opponent tend to make a lot of mistakes, just jamming cards that can take over games by themselves, like Chaos Sorcerer and Thousand Eyes Restrict, is a good way to sort of accidentally win the match. Overall, I feel that Chaos Control has a bit of an identity crisis going on. While it's supposed to combine the strengths of Standard Chaos and Goat Control, instead it just combines their weaknesses. You become vulnerable to both Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer and the spirit monsters Azura Priest and Tsukiyomi. Standard Chaos is faster and more streamlined, whereas Goat Control is better at countering the meta and harder to play against. Because Chaos Control needs a lot of different cards to support both its Chaos monsters and its Metamorphosis, you don't really have the room to fit in tech choices to counter the meta. We've seen Standard Chaos and Goat Control evolve substantially over the last year to counter the meta, whereas Chaos Control has had little room to do so. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't play Chaos Control, just that you should reconsider your reasons for playing the deck. What does your deck beat? Do you really think that Chaos Control is the best choice to win a tournament? Or are you just playing it because you like playing a bunch of power cards? I hope I've given you a lot to think about today, so thanks for watching.